Let's shoot the messenger. In a book appropriately titled Is Reality Optional?, Thomas Sowell once wrote, "People will forgive you for being wrong, but they will never forgive you for being right, especially if events prove you right while proving them wrong." It is therefore unsurprising that in the wake of the violent riots which have shaken Britain in recent days, the people who predicted all of this are in the crosshairs. Over the weekend, Alistair Campbell suggested that the police should investigate Douglas Murray for writing and promoting The Strange Death of Europe. Campbell is supposedly a mental health campaigner. He was known for screaming at underlings during his time in Downing Street, and is currently positioning himself as the voice of Britain's moral conscience. He was the spin doctor, you'll remember, who helped Tony Blair lie the country into invading Iraq, causing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Murray's great crime, on the other hand, is writing a book which predicted with great accuracy everything that is happening across our continent today. And the people who ignored and dismissed him have the audacity to blame him for what is happening instead of themselves. As you know, I'm rarely lost for words, but the hypocrisy on display here is stunning. Let me therefore condemn myself to a place in the cell next to Douglas Murray by sharing with you again the preface to my book written over 3 years ago now. The Guamir Mausoleum stands in the heart of the ancient city of Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan. The magnificent structure, known colloquially as the Tomb of the Commander, was built to preserve the remains of Tamerlane, a terrifying conqueror who modelled himself on Genghis Khan. His tomb is inscribed with the words, "When I rise from the dead, the whole world shall tremble." On the 21st of June 1941, Soviet anthropologists led by Mikhail Gerasimov opened the tomb on the orders of Joseph Stalin and began exhuming Tamerlane's body. As the scent of frankincense, rose, camphor and resin filled the air, Gerasimov and his team discovered an additional inscription inside the casket. "Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." The following morning, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The history of humanity is a series of unopened tombs, which hold not only the stories of our past, but also stark warnings about our future. As I write this in January 2021, the West is suffering from a global pandemic. COVID-19, a virus of the body, has brought devastation to millions of people around the world and forced our governments into unprecedented measures whose consequences will become apparent in the years to come. The virus and our zealous response have ravaged the global economy, deprived us of our civil liberties, and caused untold damage in every area of our lives. But another devastating epidemic has spread like wildfire through the Western world, particularly the Anglosphere, and shows no signs of abating. Unlike COVID, this is a virus of the mind. If you're fortunate enough to have avoided Twitter, do not work in a progressive industry, and are not a recent graduate, your awareness of this virus may be peripheral. You may not yet be familiar with terms like critical race theory, social justice, and wokeness. I envy you. But even so, if you're reading this book, you've likely spotted that the world around us is changing at unprecedented speed. You may have noticed a dramatic change in tone in our public discourse. Nearly 2/3 of Americans now say that they fear expressing their political views, including a majority of Democrats at 52%, Independents at 59%, and Republicans at 77%. In Britain, nearly half of us feel less free to speak our minds, while only 20% feel more free to do so than we did a few years ago. Perhaps you've watched in confusion as men and women have been positioned not as partners, but opponents in some kind of battle of the sexes. It may have struck you that our conversations about race have become a way to separate us rather than bring us together. You may have watched in confusion as statues of historical figures were defaced or torn down by angry mobs. Perhaps your employer brought in someone to explain that being white imbues you with some sort of original sin, or that being black or brown makes you a victim of life. You may even have been on the right side of these issues for years. Perhaps you thought that only bigots worry about expressing their problematic beliefs, that men are toxic and white people should atone for the terrible crimes of their ancestors and their inherited privileges in society. You may have spent your life supporting progressive causes, giving money to charities for disadvantaged groups, and being on the right side of history. And yet, as J.K. Rowling discovered, your belief in basic biology may be your undoing nonetheless. Even if you're fortunate enough to have avoided direct contact with these issues, you may have noticed an odd feeling. What it is you can't explain exactly, and for now, it is relatively easy to ignore. As you busy yourself with daily life, you reassure yourself that things can only get better. And yet, in those rare moments of reflection, You cannot help feeling a sense of foreboding. It is hard to put into words how you know this, but someone somewhere has opened another cursed tomb. The initial phases of Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, which began on the 22nd of June 1941, were a huge success. German armoured formations which had blitzkrieged their way through France, Belgium and the Netherlands in 1940 were now speeding towards Moscow, crushing disorganized Soviet resistance as they went. My great-grandfather, who had just returned home from the Winter War with Finland, was thrown into the meat grinder of the Eastern Front along with millions of others to stop the German advance. Like him, most of them never returned. If you've ever travelled from Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport into the city, you may have noticed 3 odd-looking metal structures along the road. These anti-tank obstacles mark how close the enemy came to taking the city. Across the entire front, the Soviet Union fought for its survival. Nowhere was the war more intense than at Stalingrad. Fierce fighting in the city went on for months, with Stalin sacrificing more and more men and materiel in recognition of a simple fact: retreat was no longer an option. As the Battle of Stalingrad hung in the balance on the 20th of December 1942, the body of Tamerlane was returned to his tomb and given a full Islamic burial. Within days, the Soviet Union mounted a successful counterattack at Stalingrad and went on an offensive that would not stop until it reached Berlin, saving the world from Nazi domination. Today, the fate of Western civilization hangs in the balance once again. The tomb of discord and division has been forced open by a small group of ideological zealots. Retreat is no longer an option. Either we bury the hatchet and heal, or the whole world shall tremble once more.